Listen, the only way to change America is to change people. You change people and everything changes. I think very few people would argue with the fact that we need some change in the lives of people in our country. So it's very interesting to me that if you go back to the scripture, especially read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four gospels about Christ, that he laid out a very, very clear strategy on how to change the planet. The problem is we have not executed that plan faithfully over the years. And so these next 21 to 22 Red Glasses talks that I'm going to give are going to deal with that strategy. And so I need to ask you to do me a favor. First of all, tune in every Monday morning or every week to go through these talks on the planner strategy of how to change the planet. But secondly, I need you to pass along our website and how to access these Red Glasses to your minister, your pastor, anyone in any kind of a ministry like Fellowship of Christian Athletes, Young Life, Youth for Christ, etc. Very few ministries and churches, especially churches in America, are actually doing what we're talking about. And I'm not trying to be critical and ugly and mean. I'm just telling you, Jesus gave us the strategy to change the planet. And let's get with it and do that. So the question that I want to lay before you is this. You, I believe, are no more prepared for heaven than the moment Jesus Christ comes into your life. And the question is, if you're no more prepared for heaven than the moment Jesus comes into your life and forgives you and you can start all over again, why didn't he just beam you on into heaven? Why does he leave us here? And so the question even goes from there then, why do I need to get so serious about the Lord and about following him and about allowing him to use my life? What is the motivating factor behind that? The scripture tells us that we have a problem. And this is something I go over a lot. But in the very beginning, the scripture says that God created mankind. And he set them up in a perfect environment. Everything they needed was there. But one day, they basically decided they wanted to run their own life. And so, as a result of that, they no longer had this intimate relationship with God, but were separated from him. The scripture says that the ultimate problem that resulted from that was this ugly word called sin. The scripture says, for all of sin that comes short of what God expects. Romans 3:23. Then it goes on to say in Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death. The reason all humanity has to die someday is because way back years ago, these two people screwed up, and as a result of that, in our human nature, all the way down through the centuries, we've had an inbuilt resistance in our hearts and constitution of our life to want to run our own lives. We have offended God. That's basically what sin is. Sin is a spiritual cancer that has a debt, and that debt has to be paid. And let me just say here very clearly today, there is no religion on the earth that gives an adequate answer to solving the sin problem. The wages of sin is death. How are you going to pay the debt? Either I pay it, or someone comes up with a solution where someone else pays it, and pays it in such a way that it satisfies the God that we've offended. So let me read you a little story that illustrates the point. Harry Ironside, a famous teacher, preacher, and author from the early 1900s, often told the story of a young man who was a soldier in the Russian army. Because his father was a friend of Tsar Nicholas I, the young man had been given an important role as paymaster each month for the soldiers in the barracks. The young man meant well, but his ability and character were not up to his responsibility. He ended up gambling away a large amount of the government's debt as well as all his own. Knowing that a representative of the Tsar would soon check the accounts, the young man became frightened. He was in such despair over the astronomical debt he had incurred that he decided to take his own life. With a revolver on the table in front of him, he wrote on the ledger, "A great debt, who can pay?" Then he fell asleep. Later that night, Tsar Nicholas, as he often did, visited the barracks. He recognized the sleeping young man, and then his eyes fell on the ledger. Realizing what had happened, he reached over and wrote one word beneath the young man's question. Then he left. The young man awoke suddenly and grabbed his gun, but as he did, his eyes fell on the ledger. Then beneath his words, "A great debt, who can pay?" he saw one word, Nicholas. The Tsar knew the whole debt, yet he was willing to pay it himself. Resting on the pledge of his commander, the young man fell asleep again. In the morning, a messenger came from the palace with the exact amount that he owed. Only the Tsar could pay the debt, and he did. Only Jesus could pay our debt to God, and he did. So what's the motivating factor in really allowing the Lord to work in and through your life? Here's the motivating factor. After all Jesus has done for you and me, there ought not to be anything we wouldn't do for him. You think about that.